We want to keep that low if we're in that in that industry. What's the risk of substitution? It's the likelihood that customers are going to use a substitute product relative to yours. And a substitute normally is a product or service that fulfills the same need as another product or service, but many times it's perhaps found in a different segment of the industry or in a different industry altogether. The classic example in the healthcare industry is let's say holistic or Eastern medicine versus Western medicine. Eastern medicine, all crystals and acupuncture and anything else that has to do with the Eastern type of medicine and holistic medicine is seen as a substitute, because again it is not necessarily a direct competitor to Western medicine, but what it is, it's an alternative. It's some way for the for a customer to treat an ailment to satisfy again the same basic need, but using a product that's either finding a different segment of that industry in a whole different industry itself. So that's a substitute, and substitution becomes more of a possibility when there is a huge price difference between the substitute and the product, as well as when the distinction between the substitute and the product is decreased. So when there is when I don't really see what increased value I'm getting for the extra money that I'm paying, I'm likely to substitute. Which is why, kind of with the recession coming around, less people are drinking Starbucks and potentially drinking Circle K coffee. Starbucks coffee is still better than Circle K, but that distinction between the two has somewhat decreased. If you look at Circle K, they change their cup, they got all the flavors and whatever. What they're doing there is trying to decrease the distinction between themselves. And again, because price is more of a consideration for customers now, that price difference is making people move away from Starbucks and into these substitutes. The bargaining power of buyers. Firms in an industry, organizations do not want buyers and suppliers to have any power over them. The reason is, if buyers or suppliers have power over them, they're going to ask them to do things that are going to potentially reduce the profitability of your firm. If suppliers have power over organizations, then they're going to require organizations to pay more for their suppliers. If they pay more for their suppliers, their cost structure is going to be increased. If buyers, on the other hand, have power over organizations, well, buyers are going to demand cheaper prices with even more attributes, which is again going to increase the cost structure for the organization and potentially going to reduce the revenue stream for the organization. Organizations don't want that, so they want to have the bargaining power. And it goes back again to this whole risk of entry by potential competitors. The more competitors in my industry, or the more substitutes for my products or services, the more alternatives suppliers and buyers have. That's what gives buyers and suppliers power, alternatives. If we only have one energy company in Shreveport-Bossier, then the ability for us as buyers to bargain with that agency is very, very limited, because we cannot say to them, well, if you don't fulfill my need, I'll just go somewhere else. There are very few substitutes for electricity. I can go try build a windmill or have a solar panel, but I'm likely to not be able to watch the Saints play on Sunday on my high-def television. And so because of the lack of alternatives in the industry, lack of options in the industry, as well as the lack of substitutive alternatives, they're going to have power. But as soon as more companies enter the industry and I gain more alternatives, more options as the buyer, my power is going to increase. Same thing with supplies. If you're Alex Rodriguez and you're the best at what you do, you have tons of teams lining up for your services. Right? You have that bargaining power because you have options, because of how valuable you are. But if nobody knows you, if you just came out of the minor league and you're just trying to fit, you're going to go to whatever team wants or pays you anything, because you don't have alternative. They're not, 25 GMs are not lined up at your door trying to get you to sign a contract. And as I said, all those four forces have an effect on rivalry intensity. When those forces are low, when the risk of entry is low, when there's less risk of substitution, when buyers don't have power, when suppliers don't have power, the rivalry intensity is decreased. At the end of this, remember in healthcare, we often speak about the sixth force of governmental intervention. It's very, very important because, as I said when I spoke about general forces, most times the general forces are seen as indirect forces that are felt through their influence on these Porter's forces. But in the healthcare industry, governmental forces often have a direct effect on this industry, and so they're not necessarily an indirect force, but can be considered even a sixth force. Although Porter did not speak of this because he did not concern himself with any one industry, where it's obviously evident because governments are not only competitors, they're not only payers, they're not only regulators, they're not only grantors of research and capital. I'm sure they do all those things, and because of that, they have a huge influence on this industry directly. Chapter 2 had to do with an internal analysis. I'm not necessarily going to concern myself with the financial data and the non-financial data. I'm just going to look at the internal analysis with respect to what the firm has and what the firm does. Resources and competencies required for competitive advantage. Again, resources, what the firm has. They can either be tangible or intangible. Competencies are the combination and integration of those resources, putting those resources together to do things that are different, that are unique relative to our competitors, and in order for us, when we have those ingredients or resources and competencies, the firm has the potential to create and sustain a competitive advantage. A competitive advantage is just superior performance relative to the industry average, okay, being better than the average. What makes a success, or what makes a resource or competency ideal for competitive advantage creation and sustainability? Well, we often talk about the VRIN framework. The resource or competency must be valuable. What do we mean by that? It must create value. It must attract customers in some shape or form, either because of its ability to reduce prices or because of its ability to create an attribute, a characteristic in a product or service that a customer desires. So it must have some contribution to value. It must also be rare. Why rarity? Because again, we want to do something not only better than our competitor, but necessarily something unique, something distinctive. So if we have a rare resource or competency, it will allow us to separate ourselves from our competition, which is what we want to do in order to gain a competitive advantage. We have to have superior performance. So we want to have a rare resource or competency. That is to create a competitive advantage. In order to create one, we have to have resources and competencies that are valuable and are rare. But in order for us to sustain that superior advantage, the resource or competencies must also be inimitable and non-substitutable, meaning that they are difficult or not impossible to be imitated, and they're also difficult or very challenging to be substituted for. Inimitability basically speaks about replicating either what I have or what I'm doing. Substitutability speaks about using an alternative means in order to gain the same type of advantage that the firm may already enjoy. So in order for me to protect myself and sustain my competitive advantage, it has to go beyond just value and rarity, because something that's rare today can become very, very common tomorrow if many competitors begin to imitate it or begin to substitute for it. So a resource and competency must be not only valuable and rare, but also inimitable and non-substitutable. Another element in internal analysis, a very important element, is of value chain analysis, and identify where and how to create more value for customers. Right? You go into the value chain and you look within it and try to see within my organization all the things that I do, from getting my inputs to releasing my outputs to my customers. All of those processes, all of those practices, all of those operations that I do and I that I involve myself in, where can I create more value for customers? And that has to go to the root of what actually creates value for customers. And we know what creates value for customers. Customers value price, one. So in order for me to charge lower prices, or in order for me to have necessarily attract customers through my pricing options, I can go into my value chain and identify ways or identify processes that I can reduce my cost structure in order to promote my efficiency. But beyond just price, customers are also attracted by attributes, things like quality and innovation and customer responsiveness. And then I could go into my value chain and say, where within my value chain, where within my processes and my operations can I imbue my product or service with more attributes, more quality, more innovation, more customer responsiveness that are going to attract my customers in my final product or service. So that's essentially what a value chain analysis, kind of breaking down what it is I do, my entire process from getting my inputs to delivering my outputs, and even after that, after sales service, and identifying areas where I can just create that more value. I can promote, or I can attract customers more through either reducing my prices or increasing my level of differentiation. I don't have an actual value chain on the slides, but there's one, a generic one, Porter's generic value chain, but there's also a couple I think on healthcare. You would be wise to go read that over again. A value chain analysis, discuss value chain, and how in fact a value chain looks for, especially for a healthcare organization. Our last discussion will focus on chapter, I believe it's chapter 8, the functional strategy, as well as a business strategy. What's a functional strategy? Well, it's concerned primarily with implementing business strategies. All right. At the functional level, we're not necessarily making the general business strategy decisions. We're not deciding on what type of business we're going to do, who our customers are. We're really focused on how to actually implement those creative decisions that were made at the business level and potentially influence at the corporate level. We utilize resources and competencies to help realize that competitive advantage. So at the functional level, it's all about using what we have, using what we've created and our competency, our integration of those resources in order to effectively implement that strategy, bring it all together. So functional managers are the people that work in the head of accounting, the head of marketing, the head of finance. Their job is to not necessarily make decisions for the entire organization, but to, within their function, do what is best to contribute, utilize the resources within their function to contribute and to promote the well-being of the entire organization. Follow the strategy that has been created from above. Normally, the functional strategies or decisions of a functional strategy are isolated to the specific functional area, but most often, because we're working toward a common purpose for the entire organization, there is likely to be interrelationships with other organizations. So what am I trying to say there? If I'm in charge of R&D for an organization, my functional strategy, my functional planning is largely going, or primarily going to be isolated to helping that area to be successful. But because R&D is important to production, and because it's important to marketing and all these other elements in finance, there is going to be that likelihood that I am going to have relationships with all these other functions to ensure that we're all working toward a common goal. I have at the end of the slides, and remember that functional strategies can be in fact in conflict with business strategy. I asked you this question in our forum, and so you've seen that there is that possibility. If I am isolated in what I'm doing, if I'm just doing research because this is the type of research that I like to do, but it has no relevance, has no relationship with what the organization wants to accomplish, then that's going to be a direct conflict in terms of the business strategy and the functional strategy. What happens many times, the organization wants to achieve a certain level of efficiency, let's say at the business level, and at a functional level, marketing, for example, is spending money loosely without considering the cost associated with those expenditures. The lack of benefits, I should say, associated with those expenditures. So the efficiency is decreased because functional activity is not aligned with business.